Who's the lonely generation? Why are they lonely? And how will that impact your life? And how can we turn the lonely generation into the next greatest generation for the glory of God? This is Brad Bright. Welcome to the God is Issue podcast, where I show God is the issue in every issue. Why? Because we can trace all our human problems to our view of God. Gen Z is the lonely generation, and it's because of technology. That's where they live. It's what drags them away from face-to-face relationships and deep into loneliness and despair. Now, unless you intend to go entirely off the grid, they will soon control the technology that defines your life. So the question is, how do we turn the lonely generation into the next greatest generation for the spread of the gospel? And let me start by asking, what is one of the biggest mistakes my generation makes when attempting to communicate the gospel to Gen Zers today? We talk with them as though they speak our language, but they don't. They want something that will work, and many of us are still spouting facts and apologetics. We're scratching where they're not itching. Now, I spoke at the University of Tennessee last fall, and I asked a number of students this question. What's the greatest felt need of your generation? Here's what they said. Take a listen.
Wanting to be known and loved. To fit in.
I think it's belonging.
People wanting to be seen and known.
To feel that like they belong and just have somewhere to fit in.
I think the desire for people to be fully known and accepted as they are and not rejected.
To be seen. To be known, which is the same thing. To belong, which is related to being seen. If we're going to communicate the gospel to Gen Zers, we need to understand the implications of feeling unseen and feeling like they don't belong. In 2 Corinthians 5:20, the Apostle Paul said, we are ambassadors of Christ. Folks, if we're to be effective ambassadors, we must know our audience and we must speak their language. That's kind of ambassadorship 101, isn't it? You see, as ambassadors, God does not call us to simply preach the gospel. He calls us to communicate the gospel. That's a massive difference. That means it's our job to translate the gospel for our audience. Just like the Apostle Paul did in Acts 17 when he spoke to the Areopagus in Athens. Now, too often, we behave more like a pizza delivery boy than an ambassador. Here's Jesus. And we wonder why people don't respond to the gospel. An ambassador knows that how you say something is just as important as what you say. You see, our job is not just to deliver the message of the gospel. Our job is to make sure the message is understood. Do you remember Bud Light, their marketing disaster in 2003? Budweiser embraced a transgender influencer to promote their pop product to a lot of blue-collar workers and good old boys. Talk about tone deaf. Budweiser lost a quarter of its market share. That translated into about $1 billion, and Budweiser still has not recovered. The product never changed, folks. It's the exact same product. The problem was not the product. The problem was they forgot who their audience was. So why am I talking about beer in the context of the gospel? Because we don't know our audience either. We're just as tone deaf. You see, how you say something is just as important as what you say. When my doctor starts explaining my cancer to me using medical terminology, I always stop him and say, okay, please speak English. He's so accustomed to using medical terminology that sometimes he forgets I don't speak medicalese. You see, how you say something is just as important as what you say. Now, oftentimes, those of us who attend church every Sunday, we forget that our culture doesn't understand our churchy language. But folks, they don't care about facts. They don't care about apologetics. And it's not their job to learn our language. It's our job to translate the gospel into their language. We're ambassadors, not gospel delivery boys. You see, how you say something is just as important as what you say. My wife and I speak in two entirely different love languages. She feels loved by words of encouragement, by compliments, by cards, by great conversation, by dreaming together, and by a pretty rose. Me? I feel loved when she fixes a good meal or when the house is cleaned or when things are organized. You see, I have a hard time resting inside when my home is in chaos. And I feel loved when she takes time to honestly critique something I've written. You see, it makes me feel like she's got my back. She's an artist and a dreamer. I'm a realist and a problem solver. Do you think that might create some communication challenges in our marriage? Folks, I've had to learn to speak her language, and she's had to learn to speak mine. It's taken a lot of time and effort. I still don't speak her language well, but I've gotten better. She's gotten a lot better at speaking my love language. You see, how I say I love you is just as important as saying I love you. Again, think of Jesus talking with the woman at the well. He knew his audience, partly because he was God and partly because he listened. She talked about water, so Jesus talked about living water. He used words and concepts she could relate to. You see, how we say something is just as important as what we say. The students at the University of Tennessee said that their greatest felt need of their generation was to be seen, to be known, to belong. Let that sink in. They grew up on social media where everyone shows you their best side but hides their brokenness. They all know they're not seen, and if they're not seen, how can they possibly feel like they belong? You know, what they see online is a shiny, happy avatar that resembles the person but is not the person, and they all know it. This generation craves to be seen as they really are, not as the highly edited online illusions they create of themselves. They crave to belong, but how could they belong if they don't feel seen? Folks, that opens a gigantic opportunity for the gospel. This generation is pleading to know the God who sees them. You remember what Hagar, Abraham's concubine, called God in Genesis 16? She called him the God who sees me. This generation craves to know that God. Now, I believe that has two implications for how we present the gospel. First, we must work hard to make Gen Zers feel seen by us. Now, let me ask you, is a person more likely to feel seen if we preach at them or if we listen to them first? Obviously, if we listen to them. That means I must ask questions and that I have to really listen to them, not to critique them, but to understand them, to see them. Just like Jesus saw the woman at the well, just like God saw Hagar. That doesn't mean agreeing with them. Jesus didn't agree with the woman at the well. God didn't agree with Hagar's choice. But second, we must provide a place where they feel like they belong, where they're both seen and welcome. Invite them into your life. Ask them for lunch or dinner. Ask them to hang out. Ask them to do part of your life with you. You know, help them to feel like they have a place where they're seen and where they're welcome. Do you know the most effective tool I had when I ministered to the students at the University of Washington? My Jeep. On a sunny day, I'd rip the top off, pick up 3 guys, and off we'd go. That helped build the relationship, which exponentially increased my ability to speak into their lives. That was important then, that's more important now. If you can ask good questions, if you can listen, if you can invite people into your life, you can reach the lonely generation with the good news of Jesus. But it starts with asking good questions and then listening. Gen Z, the lonely generation, could become the next greatest generation for the glory of God. They're smart, compassionate, and they want to make a difference. But they need the love of Jesus and the community of his people to get there, and you and I can give them both. Ask God to help you change the life of one Gen Zer this year. See them, welcome them, and then introduce them to the God who sees them. God is the issue in every issue, but especially when it comes to how we communicate the gospel. We are ambassadors of Christ, not delivery boys for Jesus. This is Brad Bright. Thanks for joining me today. If you found this podcast helpful, please like and subscribe. And when subscribing, don't forget to click on the bell so you'll be notified whenever I post a new podcast. But the most important thing you can do, folks, is to share it. God bless.